Alright, hello, welcome back everybody. PayPal and Patreon are down below if you want to support me, only do so if you actually can. Also, if you want to access the graphs used in this video and all kinds of other graphs across all kinds of different subjects that are free to access, there's a link to a Google Drive in the description. Any support also helps with the maintenance of all those in that database as well. So it's time to go down the annual CO2 and equivalent emissions update for select countries and regions. So total global CO2 emissions have thankfully been on the slowdown, although it was kind of obvious that we were still going to get into the 40s before there was any kind of plateau. The 40s in terms of gigatons per year, that is. And we crossed that threshold last year, and this year looks like we're upwards a little bit further to 41.6 gigatons worldwide, 30% of which is just China by itself. Although they did have a stall for a little bit, they have resumed climbing, though thankfully a bit slower than before, but still they are now up to 12.5 gigatons per year just by themselves. The US has actually plateaued and been on a decline already, a gradual decline up to this point at least, peaking at 5.8 gigatons per year eh, back in the mid 2000s, and since then gradually heading down to now 5.13. Europe in total, all the EU countries plus Serbia plus the UK plus Ukraine, Europe in total hit its peak a while back, hitting above 5.5 and starting its gradual decline early. And now, in total, the continent under these set parameters is down to uh, b- is down to a combined total of 3.13 gigatons per year. Now, within that, it breaks down among the major contributors to Germany, who did exceed 1 gigaton per year itself back in the past, decades ago. They have now declined to the point of being under 600 megatons, down to 0.59 gigatons, and they would be lower if they had not made the really unwise decision of shutting down all their nuclear plants and having to replace that capacity with coal and gas. France was once up above half a gigaton, and over the decades they have declined down to about 250 megatons. And you can see there in the and you can see in the 70s or 80s, sudden abrupt decline as France quickly went nuclear in terms of power generation. The UK also was up over half a gigaton at one point and has over time declined down to 0.32. Spain got up close to 1, but never actually reached it, I believe, and has since now declined down to 0.21. Italy did get up to about half a gigaton per year on its own, and it has since, though, declined down to 0.29. And Poland, and they have been declining over the last decade or more and are at around 270 megatons or so, now exiting Europe. Turkey has gradually been climbing and has had stalls along with its economic stalls at different points in time, but has just now, as of this year, reached half a gigaton per year of CO2 emissions. Russia within the USSR, not the whole USSR, but just Russia within the USSR, got up to about 2.5, crashed when the economy fell with the USSR falling apart, came back up into the low twos, and has since kind of stayed around there, gradually creeping down, sort of, to rate around 2, this time coming in at 2.02 gigatons per year. India has been on their upward curve, now exceeding 3 gigatons per year and actually coming in at 3.43. Saudi Arabia got up over 700 megatons, actually got close to 8, I believe. However, as they have been more rapidly switching things over to gas fired power generation instead of oil fired, they have stalled off their increase a bit lower and are now this time at 680 megatons or so. Iran, meanwhile, is still climbing, and partly due to the opposite effect, as it needs to re-inject so much natural gas into its oil fields to keep them pressurized, to keep the oil flowing so it can export at least some portion of it to make money. it now doesn't have enough gas to completely rely on gas-fired power generation and has started resorting to oil-fired power generation and has come just short this time of 1 gigaton of CO2 per year to 0.99. The UAE is beginning to level off, it looks like, especially as they're now getting a big chunk of their electricity from that nuclear plant, and they have leveled off in the low 300s, this time coming in around 340 megatons or 0.34 gigatons. Japan hit their peak decades ago at around 1.3, shut down their nuclear plants, but only did so temporarily for a few years. Japan is actually doing the intelligent thing and reactivating theirs. So their emissions are now going down again, and they are currently at 1.03. South Korea has likely peaked and is now on a gradual decline. They got close to 700 megatons, but they're now down to about 620. Mexico has been climbing mostly up until these post-COVID years. They've really slowed down. Seems like their emissions, thankfully, are stagnating, and they're staying under 600 megatons or zero point 0.6 gigatons, coming in at 0.58. Brazil's emissions climbed over time in kind of an undulating stair-step fashion, having having stalls or troughs with the different economic crises the country went through, similar to Argentina's pattern. And Brazil, as of now, is up to around 0.55 gigatons per year. Argentina, meanwhile, as mentioned, has a similar up-down undulating stair-step pattern, not as high of an angle, as high of an upward trajectory, but they are up to now 0.25 gigatons. Canada, like the US to the south of them, has largely been on a plateau for a while, and they're hanging out just under 600 megatons, coming in this time at 580 or 0.58 gigatons. Indonesia continuing to climb as they economically rise and are still predominantly doing so with coal-fired power generation, and their domestic oil consumption via gasoline, diesel, etc. is rising as well. They are now up to 0.8 gigatons or 800 megatons per year. South America as a whole, including Argentina and Brazil, but also including everybody else, the continent of South America as a whole has actually not returned to the peak emissions level it had in the early 2010s. A fair portion of that drop has been on part of Brazil's economic turmoil since then. They were up around 1.5 gigatons at that point, and now they've climbed back up in emissions to only about 1.42. Thailand has seemingly started leveling off here as their population is now beginning to decline and their oil consumption is plateauing as well. They're just under zero point 0.3 gigatons at 0.29. Australia is pretty much plateaued out as well, and they are hanging out for a while in the mid 400s, around 450 megatons. Vietnam, as it economically rises rapidly, is still climbing pretty quickly and is now up above 400 megatons itself, coming in at 0.41 gigatons or 410 megatons. Malaysia not climbing as quickly and potentially population related, especially likely going to be leveling out kind of soon. This time they came in at around 330 megatons. Africa as a whole, the entire continent, has almost reached 2 gigatons of CO2 emissions, uh, but is still climbing by really small amounts and is at 1.86. And out of that, the largest contributors are South Africa and Egypt. South Africa continuing to wobble kind of aimlessly in the 400s, down from their peak and likely heading lower, but not for good reasons, not because they're trying to go lower, but instead because South Africa is kind of falling apart. And Egypt's emissions, unfortunately, continuing to rise. They're up to about zero point 0.3 gigatons, and they're going to be going higher as Egypt has not really been able to maintain its natural gas supply all that well. So, similar to Iran, they're starting to resort to oil fired power generation to fill the gaps in their power grid. And that's the end of everybody we have on the list for this one. So thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal and Patreon are down there if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. The link to the Drive folder with these graphs and all kinds of other graphs across all kinds of different similar subjects is in the description, along with links to my photography and my blue sky. There's a link in the top pinned comment to my cat's YouTube channel. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you all around next time.